Hi, and welcome to the first episode in the $5 million project. So as part of this episode, what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through sort of the early stage inspiration in terms of how the business concept came to mind and how I took it from the point of a concept to a point where, okay, this is something we're actually going to do and actually begin working on. So I want to take you back roughly a year from now. So it's sort of May 2019 time. And I was over in Sydney. I was hosting a panel, and the panel was a group of recruitment leaders who'd implemented some sort of technology into their business. And we were talking about how they did it, what they achieved, sort of what some of their learnings were off the back of this. And I ended up speaking to one of the panelists who was a director of a very, very big recruitment agency. And he was talking to me about how they'd implemented a very, very successful recruitment automation tool into their business. And sort of made my ears prick a little bit because that's something I'd been thinking about for a long while because my business is a marketing business. And we've always looked for marketing automation or automation for parts of the recruitment process to make our life easier, but haven't been able to find anything ourselves. And he'd implemented something which is a product that exists very broadly, and a lot of people use it globally, but is not specifically for the recruitment industry. So what he told me was they'd actually put together a project team, and it had taken several months of implementation to embed this product into their business. And I sort of got thinking about this and thinking, okay, that's fantastic, but for most recruitment agencies, and most recruitment agencies are small, so they're somewhere between 10 and 30 people. They might have one person in IT, or more likely they outsource their IT function. But they're not going to have the resource or willingness to invest in a technology consultant or project manager to run a project where they implement something that's going to be very, very costly up front, require a lot of customization with no guarantee of results. They're just not in the position to do that. So there's got to be a gap in the market for a solution that is built fit for purpose, so everything's set up that it can be rolled out with very, very little implementation and begin to work sort of automatically. So that was one conversation I had that sort of reconfirmed thoughts that I've been having for a long while. At the same time, I was having more and more frustration with some of the vendors we were working with in the technology space in the recruitment sector for our marketing agency. I was finding that whilst a couple of them had fairly strong products, their implementation teams and the level of care and thought they were putting into their client delivery was not where I would want it to be if I were running a company. And actually I was having my second experience of this. Going back a couple of years, I'd worked with another company that we still work with, and I found their delivery to be a million miles away from what they were pitching. And it had meant more work for us, and it would meant the complexity, the trying to get results was always falling on our shoulders rather than what was meant to be the solution that delivers these results. And at the time I thought, okay, that's too hard basket, let someone else who's the expert in that space do that particular thing, and we'll stick to our knitting. You hear that advice a lot, stick to what you know. So I followed that guidance, but this was the second time it was happening with a second provider. And I think you can follow that guidance once, but there comes a point where you go, well, if these guys can't do it to the level that I think it should be done, then I'll do it myself. And I don't really want to labour that point too much, but there was sort of that push factor. If I don't do this, I've got to continue dealing with these providers that are substandard, and then the pull factor of there's a massive gap over here. There's something I know can be hugely successful and add a massive amount of value, and there's a huge demand for it. And there's no one delivering or who's got a product in that space. So I've got a push and a pull, sort of corralling me to make a decision of something that I've been thinking about for a long while. So at my next board meeting, I raised it with the other director of my business and said quite simply, look, Scott, I think there's an idea here, that there's these two factors at play here. There's a clear gap. And it's something that I think we could go after very, very well, and we could be very, very successful if we do this. And to his credit, he's a type of guy that likes an idea and can see where there's sort of an opportunity to be had. And he said, look, Chris, it makes perfect sense. Let's do it. And that wasn't really the response I was expecting. I was expecting a little bit more pushback and a little bit more, I'm not quite sure about that. But, we had on and off been discussing this for a while, but I think that positivity is really what has enabled me to move this forward, because it was okay, yeah, let's do this, rather than it being locked away in the back room as an idea sort of every now and then that annoys you. It was more of a, okay, we'll put this idea on the front and we'll actually get on and we'll do this. So I just want to interject the flow here a little bit and talk a little bit about board meetings. Not because it's got anything to do with sort of the longer story of history here, but it is very, very important if you run your own business, or if you're looking to set up your own business, that you think about your advisors. And for me, I learnt the hard way. I set up a business, I owned 100% of that business, and for 3 years, I ran it as my own business. I did look for a few advisors and didn't have much success over that time. But when I found someone that really wanted to be involved in the business and we set up a formal board, all of a sudden the business went from sort of crawling along to massive growth, really took off. And the reason for this is two minds are greater than one, but also it holds you accountable. So when you're running your own business, you tend to be very stuck in the weeds. You're doing what matters that day or the next week, and you might take a little bit of time to be strategic if you're very, very well self-managed, but most of the time you're not. When you've got someone else to be accountable to, you're forced to be able to report to them on your progress. You're forced to be able to tell them how well you're doing. You're forced to take a step back and think strategic. Otherwise, the meetings that you have are completely unproductive. And it's obvious that the business isn't actually a viable opportunity. So for me, I highly recommend anyone that's setting up, at least find a couple of advisors that you can be accountable for. But if possible, find someone who can join a board or come in as an advisor who you can actually be truly accountable for on a fairly regular frequency. I think it's very, very important. Okay, so off the back of that board meeting, we actually got pretty excited, and we ended up phoning a couple of people that we knew and booking in some meetings so we could explain to them the product that we wanted to build and get their feedback on our ideas. So we both went back to our own business and went back to our day jobs effectively. But my role as this task was to go forward and try and build out what we thought was an idea and actually figure out what that contained and what it was going to look like. So the way I ended up doing this is really trying to take all the ideas up in my head, do lots of research and document it, and then be able to say, okay, well, that's what we're going to do, that's not what we're going to do. So I'd be scribbling away in notebooks at night times. And then my process was that I'd actually photo those notes and I'd save them into my folders, and you can see some examples on the screen now. But I would then go through those notes and I would actually rewrite them into something that made sense, so that I was going through them twice and thinking about them sort of 2 times over. Another thing that I did, we were actually renovating at a particular time, and I had a big wall that we just built. So I said to my wife, I'm just going to draw on here because I really wanted big space. I wanted to be able to get the ideas and write them in big. In actual fact, it didn't make too much difference to be written on paper, but for me it made a lot of difference because I was able to see it sort of larger than life, and I was able to sort of visualize in my mind how it all interconnected and how it all joined and worked together. So that was one exercise that for me was really, really valuable, and I've actually done it a couple of times since then. But I think the more practical side of things is just writing notes and then rewriting them and going through them a couple of times. And I've refined that, and I'll talk about that as we go through these video series. So I no longer write paper-based notes, I write digital notes. I pull them all in and have a very, very clear system in terms of how all that comes together, but we'll get to that later. Anyway, I've gone through about a week now of pulling all this information together, and I phoned up Scott and I said, look, I just don't think I can be ready. I don't think I can get the level of detail we need ready for this meeting. And to his credit, rather than rushing or rather than postponing the meeting, he said, look, let's just cancel that meeting. Let's spend a bit more time thinking this through. And then when we're ready, we'll start connecting with people. And that for me was really, really valuable advice because it just took some of the pressure off, and the pressure was good, but it then enabled me to step back a little bit and look at it from a more strategic perspective. So the next 2, 3, 4 weeks actually move really, really slow. And I think that's one of the things in business that people often don't talk about, is the frustration of moving slow and is this thing actually going to become a reality? So at this point, we've got no funding, we've got no partners, we've got no one that's going to develop the software for us. All we have is an idea. And I think a lot of people have ideas. The key is how you take an idea from nothing and you actually get some momentum on it. So what I found myself doing is, I'm running my current company, and that's taking at least 10 hours a day. I've got a wife and 2 young kids that take another few hours a day. So dedicating some of the other time to actually continuing to do research. I had to do it and force myself to do it, most days of the week where possible. For me, I've never really found that a major problem, specifically around something like this. And that's because when I'm passionate about something and when I'm interested in it, I actually really enjoy putting that time into it. The frustration is putting the time in and not knowing whether it's wasted time. Because, as I said, at this stage, nothing's concrete. So it could be that I'm doing all this research and come up with all this information, but it's not actually going to be utilised. And that's kind of a calculated risk that you have to take. But I continued doing it. And at the same time, both Scott and I just started reaching out to a few other people in the industry that we knew to find out if there were other people that might be interested in coming into business with us or potentially helping us in some way, shape or form. And that's another sort of really important side note here, is around partnerships. For me, in my first business, I kept it all to myself, and I've already spoken about the importance of having an advisor or someone else involved in the business. But from a financial perspective, you hear a lot where people say it's better to have a small share of something really big than a big share of something very small. And I knew that was true, but I really had to have it proven to myself that it was true to believe it. But now with this second business, I was very, very open-minded around ownership. In actual fact, it's been sort of fairly low on my list of things. All I wanted to do was be involved in a business that was exciting, that was going to make a difference, rather than worrying about control and ownership and that side of things. So I think if you can, try and let go of some of that fear of control and just let things run course. As long as you're not silly or you don't, get rid of too much control at too early a stage, I generally think you'll be in a pretty good position. So we both started making calls, and I had a call with a person I know in the technology industry, and it turned out we both had relatively similar ideas. But my reservation was their business competed with some of the companies that I knew that we would need to partner with. And I didn't want to get to a point where we were very, very restricted with our go-to-market plan. Even though that was potentially 12 months off, I was thinking ahead and trying to think, okay, if we make this deal, if we go down this path, it's going to be a major issue. So I didn't take that conversation any further. But Scott had a conversation with someone he knew that introduced us to a gentleman named Mike. And Mike ran an outsourced development shop. So basically he has a lot of developers in a different country that do projects for companies all over the place. And that sounded at a high level like something that was worth exploring. So Scott set up a meeting, an initial phone conversation for myself, him and Mike to really discuss the idea and see whether the three of us got on. Because if we did, then there was a potential to move forward. And again, at some stage I want to segue into the power of networking, because there is absolutely no way I could have got this idea from an idea to a thing that's, I'm very, very confident is going to be successful and is a reality without a network. Because you just don't have the people to call on to help you or to connect you to other people. You have to pay for everything without a network. When you've got a network, people will help you out because they know you or they like you, or they can connect you to people where you're able to have sort of warm introductions and warm conversations. And the first conversation is not about money. You're still going to have to pay for it, but the conversations are very, very different. So I'll definitely delve into networking later. But for now, we've set up this call, and really the pressure's back on me because I know that this is effectively a pitch. We have to be able to present the idea as a whole, as an entire thing, to get someone else excited and bought in. So in the next video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through how we got the idea and articulated it And then from there, the stages we went through, and it was very, very quick, to a point where we had an agreement and we knew that this was actually going to move forward. We managed to put together funding and have a development team in place.